Now, depending on what sources and types of funding and investment approaches you decide to work with and have the opportunity to work with, this will inform how you end up registering your venture. But before we talk about different options to register, I want to mention that the first option is to not start a new venture. So think about all the overhead and all the new resources and time and energy that goes into maintaining an organization. The organization itself is a whole beast, other than actually effectively delivering the product or service. So make it your plan A if you can, to start by talking to existing organizations, whether companies, nonprofits, or any other type of institution where you might be able to at least prototype and start rolling out your product or service there before you register your own. Sometimes you have to register your own organization when you win an award or some funding, but again, you can also do that in partnership with someone else, and that has many advantages to it other than the financial. When you have existing resources, you might have more power to influence more change, and also more perspective than people. But if you do have to register your own organization, then you have a lot of different options. And again, going back to that spectrum of social entrepreneurship, it's very intuitive. So if you're not going to generate surplus revenue, then you're more likely going to register as a nonprofit or charity. And this is different in every country. In the US, it's a 501c3. In Lebanon, we call it an association or NGO, the non-governmental organization. And then if you are going to produce surplus revenue, you could still possibly register as a nonprofit if you're going to reinvest all that revenue into your social mission. The advantage of that would be that people who invest in you or donate to you, you could still take donations for research and development, and people who invest in you could get tax breaks potentially. Or you could register a for-profit where you have more freedom to decide what you're going to do with the revenue and what percentage of that revenue will be reinvested in your social mission. Some people do both. They have a hybrid setup where they have a for-profit and a non-profit. And the advantage of that is that the for-profit is able to access the types of funding that require a financial return, while the non-profit is able to accept donations that can support things like research and development. And it also depends on which country you're in. In some countries, it's very easy to register a nonprofit, and it's harder to register a for-profit. In other countries, it's the other way around. Another registration option I've seen around the world is the cooperative, where it's really the people working in this venture that own it. And that's really common in agriculture, but also in consumer goods and in all types of industries. So you might consider a cooperative model, shared ownership. Now, registering is only the first step. That's kind of like birthing the organization. But when you birth it, you then have to think about its health. And so I've included this figure, 11.1 on page 222, that talks about the different diagnostics you're going to want to do to determine the health of your organization. There's really so much that you have to think about. Think of vital signs of an organism. Governance, that refers to how it's set up and who has power to make decisions. Financial health, in terms of the accounting and keeping track of your revenue and reporting it and your taxes. Institutional memory, which is really important. And I'm going to stop there for a minute, because institutional memory refers to getting this beyond the founders. What if something happens to you, or if this gets bigger than you, which it should, and that's what you should want. You need to have everything documented so that it's no longer relying on the people that started it. Working on process maps, which we talked about earlier, is one great way to do this, and there's software out there for that, to really standardize and automate the key steps in providing your product and service. And you might have multiple different process maps for different components of that. Policies and procedures are another form, manuals for training new people, etc. And that brings us to human resources, how to recruit and train and retain talents. Going back to something related to governance, transparency and accountability is really important. So when you're starting out on your own or with 3 or 4 other people, it's kind of easy to exchange information and to make decisions together. When the organization starts growing, you want to make sure that you retain that internal transparency and external. And accountability is something that's related to transparency, but it also speaks to where does the buck stop? This word is confusing because it's used in different ways. It's like, who am I accountable to? Well, we know that you're accountable to the people that you're serving, but you're also accountable to your funders, you're accountable to people on the team. And another thing related to accountability is how the team is going to work together. Like, who's responsible for each task, who's going to be consulted and informed, and who's accountable for that responsibility. And that's just really structuring the roles of your team as you grow. We mentioned tax health. Legal health is also really important. And these types of things, at the beginning, you might want to outsource rather than hire. It's definitely worth the money to have someone else do it. They're more qualified, and you don't have time to focus on being your own bookkeeper. And information and communication systems are really important, which we'll talk about in the next segment. So these are some of the things that you'll start having to think about as your organization grows. And in terms of your team, it's really important to be far-sighted. It's so tempting to keep doing everything yourself because you don't have time to stop and deal with structuring it in a way that you're delegating to others. But go back and think about those key roles that we talked about a few segments ago in terms of the key processes and competencies that your organization needs, and making sure that you have someone accountable and in charge of each one, and that you're orchestrating. Or you might not even end up deciding to be the CEO. You might decide that you want to stick with a technical role and hire someone else to be the face of the organization. Now, speaking of the face of the organization, in many cases, you're going to have to put together a board. Now, if you're just running a sole proprietorship or small company that's owned by the founders, you don't need to do that. But that's not going to go very far in terms of scale. And as soon as you accept funding, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you're going to have to create a board. So a board is someone who's actually legally responsible for the health of your organization. And many people have a love-hate relationship with their board because they can be your greatest asset and your greatest headache. So these are the people that even if you're the CEO and the boss, you're going to have to report to. The chair of the board presides over this. Usually it's something very manageable, like having quarterly board meetings. So people are reporting to you and you're reporting to the board. So the main advice I want to give you about a board, again, is very similar to the advice I gave you about putting together your team. You want to look for skills that you don't have, experiences and competencies that you don't have, and diverse perspectives. Diversity is your #1 weapon, because when people are looking at things through different perspectives, that's the only time you're going to get the full picture. When people are questioning assumptions, which is what you did when you started out tackling this challenge, you want people to question you, and you want to be able to answer them. And when you don't know the answer, you want to be working with people where you're not afraid to say it, and you're not afraid to go to them when things aren't working, not just when things are. So putting together and managing your board is one of the things that you're going to have to be most thoughtful about, and maintaining that relationship is another one. And these are all things that you're going to be doing in order to make sure that this venture goes beyond you. At the beginning, it relies a lot on the founders. And even as it grows, it's going to rely a lot on you. But you want to leave it in a place where it has institutional memory, a whole host of people who own the mission, and a board that's there to protect and serve. And that's really what it means to build organizational health.